So I want to thank you for choosing this session. My name is Akil Parker, and the title of the session is Histematics, Using African American History to Make Math More Relevant. Histematics is kind of my baby. It's a teaching framework that I've been more formally working on, and I'm more formally developing it since 2019, but I realized that it's something that I've really been using throughout my whole teaching career since like 2005, right? Just organically, just as a means to try to make, math more relevant, since I, first started teaching. And I've always had an interest in history. I probably got it honest. My father is a longtime history teacher. So I grew up, in a household with, a lot of history books around, and I always wanted to make sure I had like really good history grades so I wouldn't embarrass him, when I was in school. Because that would just seem like too much of a contradiction, right? So Histematics is basically when like the name infers, I'm trying to use history to teach mathematics and simultaneously use mathematics to teach history. Go into a little bit of bio about myself. My formal post-secondary education was at Morgan State University down in Baltimore. Baltimore is also where I grew up at. But I earned a degree in finance. I never wanted to be a teacher, never wanted to be a math teacher. I kind of fell into math teaching because I had a baby on the way. And I was a bank examiner prior to that, and that wasn't a good fit for me. I was about to be fired from that position with the FDIC, but I worked it out so that I could resign instead so I wouldn't have a termination on my record. And then I was kind of looking for something to do, and many people told me that, if you're a black man teaching math, you can kind of write your own ticket. There's always a shortage of black male math teachers. So I took advantage of that opportunity. I was always pretty good at math for most of my K through 12 experience. And then, I just went into the classroom. I started doing substitute work. And then from there, I got more serious about it and became an actual full-time teacher. Later on during my teaching career, I ended up getting a master's in ed leadership from Lincoln. And that was kind of motivated by the fact that I worked for a principal that was pretty incompetent. So I figured if this guy could be a principal, I definitely should be able to be a principal. So I want to thank him. I want to thank him for that motivation. But then I got the degree, and then I decided that I preferred to be, on the front lines in the trenches. I didn't want to deal with all the bureaucracy and the paperwork and all of that type stuff. So I never actually went and became a principal, right? At least not up to this point. So I've been teaching for 18 years. Like I said, I started back in 2005. And I'm still teaching now. I left the school district of Philadelphia. I spent most of my time teaching in charter schools, but I was at the school district of Philadelphia for 3 years. I taught at Central for 1 year on a special assignment. And then I ended up going to Overbrook because Central figured I wasn't a good fit for them. I ended up at Overbrook for 2 years, and then I left the school district of Philadelphia, and I focused more on different alternative education programs and also teaching on the college level. As an adjunct, I was teaching at LaSalle at one point. And then I got the opportunity to teach at Cheney University, where I still teach. And I always wanted to teach at a HBCU since I was in many ways, developed by HBCUs. Like I said, I went to Morgan State University. Actually, before I went to Morgan, I went to Morehouse for my freshman year of college. But I got pretty homesick, so I ended up transferring back home, and ended up matriculating to Morgan State. And, years later, went to Lincoln. So I've always had an appreciation. And also, which is kind of ties into the Histematics concept, I studied this brother named Octavius Catto, right? There's a statue of Octavius Catto right outside of City Hall right here in Philly. And when I learned that he was a math teacher, the math professor at the Institute for Colored Youth, which is now Cheney University, Institute for Colored Youth, when it was located right in South Philly, not too far from South Street in the area where W.E.B. Du Bois did his research, which later became the Philadelphia Negro, right? That text, the important text. Yeah, your hood, right? So that motivated me, So I said, and I'm always big on like trying to carry on tradition. So, I try to, I'm teaching math at Cheney now, and I've been teaching math at Cheney for the past 5 years. Trying to, carry on that tradition. I founded All This Math. This is what the T-shirt is for. Back in 2017, I really just started out to kind of become more serious about math tutoring, because you know how it is. All of us as STEM teachers, people have probably been ask you all the time, can you tutor my daughter, can you tutor my son, SAT prep, whatever. So I kind of always do that on the side, but I said, well, what if I made this into a more official tangible business, you know. That's why I started all this math, but then it kind of grew into some educational consulting, also some teacher coaching, and also a YouTube channel when, you know, the pandemic started in 2020. I'll talk to you more about the YouTube channel before the presentation ends. Because I really made a conscious decision in response to a lot of the conversation about deficiencies among black students, specifically in math, and I just decided that I just want to teach math to the entire black community, right? And now with the resources we have, with the internet, with YouTube, with social media, you have an iPhone and a tripod, dry erase board, and some markers, you can pretty much do it. It's really just an issue of marketing, letting people see it. And when you think about all the nonsense that's on social media already as it is, you know, it makes sense to try to offer something that's more positive to kind of counterbalance all the foolishness, right? So, yeah, and that's the link to the YouTube channel, All This Math, all right? A very, I guess, histematical channel and resource. All right, so this also is like very, kind of encompasses like the concept of histematics. Throughout my entire career, students would always say this to me, you know, in a loving way, Mr. Parker, you should have been an African-American history teacher, right? And I would say to them, well, you know, I can do both because, you know, I'd be in a geometry class or be in a stats class or be in an algebra 2 class, and I just might want to just have a conversation about Assata Shakur. I might want to talk about, you know, Gabriel Prosser's, you know, planned slave rebellion or Nat Turner or something like that. That's what I want to talk about. So then, you know, naturally I might create, you know, test questions that reflect that still deal with the mathematical concept at hand and topic, but, you know, it's grounded in African-American history anyway, right? Because I also realized while teaching that while a lot of my students had math deficiencies, they also had deficiencies in terms of historical awareness. A lot of students are taught growing up in Philadelphia, right in Philadelphia, they might not have known who Cecil B. Moore was, right? They might live in North Philly, take the sub, get off at Cecil B. Moore stop every day, get on at the Cecil B. Moore stop every day, but don't know who Cecil B. Moore is. And it's not their fault. Nobody told them, right? Maybe there's many adults in their lives that also don't know who Cecil B. Moore was, right? And I don't think that's coincidental at all. So I realized, well, I have this so-called captive audience, so how can I also teach them the math that they need, but also the history, provide the historical, you know, awareness to them. So this is what we started doing. So around 2019, like I said, I've been kind of doing this my whole career, but around 2019, I caught air of a conference called the Teaching Black History Conference, which was offered by a center run by this brother named Dr. LeGarrette King, who was at the University of Missouri, but is now at SUNY Buffalo, right, upstate New York now. And it's the Teaching Black History Conference. And this concept was on theme, right? So I kind of decided to sit down once and for all and kind of formalize and codify, you know, one major aspect of my teaching style, which is how I try to combine African-American history and African history with mathematics, right? So basically what it is just, it's a framework where we use math to teach history and we use history to teach math. And I broke it down into 5 main elements. The first element is numerical triggers. Real quickly, that's basically like creating math problems that will result in certain numerical answers, such as, you know, 1,955 might create a problem, an addition problem. This would be great for like elementary level students. The answer might be 1,955. And then what that does is I'm being intentional because that provides a nice segue into a conversation about the Montgomery bus boycott, which took place in 1955. Or I might do a problem where the answer is 381. And we can also talk about the Montgomery bus boycott because it lasted 381 days, right? So it's just opportunities. And like, you know, in math classes, like we're always throwing numbers around and a lot of these numbers have significance that we can like think of, you know, kind of like, you know, if you have elders that like play the numbers or play lottery, they say, oh, I should play that number, right? So it's kind of like a similar type of thing. And the goal is like for these young children when they grow up, because they not only did that calculation in that class and practice that skill in that class, but also they'll remember that number. So whenever they see that number, whenever they hear somebody say that number, they'll think of that historical aspect. They'll think of that historical moment, right? So they'll have that historical awareness. And it'll help them to make better decisions as adults in the present because they'll have a better frame of reference, right? So it's a way to teach history right in the math class, right? Also part B, African-centered word problems and applications. Using word problems, right? Word problems that are specific to the experience of the African-American students. And this is a good way to teach them who Cecil B. Moore was, or who Mumia Abu-Jamal was, or who Richard Allen actually was. You guys, I taught students that grew up in Richard Allen projects, but didn't know who Richard Allen was, right? And that seems strange, but it's actually not that strange, actually, because if they haven't been taught, then, how would they know, right? So the word problems. And I'm also very big on word problems. I'm sure you all, if you're science teachers, are very, very big on word problems as well, because that's really how the relevancy of mathematics is shown. I think a lot of students think math is irrelevant because in a lot of classrooms, like my classrooms earlier in my career, I was scared of word problems. Because when I was a student, I was scared of word problems. I would do them if I had to, but when I became an actual classroom teacher, I would kind of shy away from them. I would focus on, okay, let's solve the equations. But then at the end of the section, when it's like, okay, let's do some word problems that require us to decode this word problem and then translate the information into an equation and then solve the equation, I would kind of shy away from that. And due to the pacing guides that I would get from content team leads and whoever, I kind of was able to kind of do that, right? So later on, I'm like, no, word problems are probably the most important thing we could do. So I'm just very heavy in the word problems these days, right? Because that's where you see the significance. That's where you see the relevance. So if you don't do the word problems, then you can't see the relevance. So you're going to be the student in class. It's like, when am I going to use this stuff? What do I need this for? Why should I care? Because we didn't do the word problems. If you did the word problems, then you see the significance. You see the relevance. And even if the word problems in the particular textbook you're using may be culturally irrelevant to you, right? The word problem, the method is really just a framework. Similar to like you go into the store, go to Target, go to Walmart, buy a picture frame. You buy a picture frame, it's got a stock photo inside the frame. When you come home, you sit the frame on your table, you probably take the stock photo out and put your own picture in, right? So the method that you use to solve the word problem from the textbook that your teacher might give you, even if it's irrelevant, is really just a framework. But you could take that method and apply it to something that is relevant in your daily life and something that you do care about in your daily life. So that's the thing that the students have to understand. Next element is conceptual double entendres. So this is when I'm thinking about concepts from math, right, that actually mirror concepts in social relations, mirror concepts in political science, they mirror concepts in sociology, different things like that, right? Again, as a means to give like a storytelling aspect to the mathematics, right? And we'll get into some of that with my examples. I have 5 examples that we're going to talk about. So we'll get really into that. Also, statistics of the African experience. It's definitely a major part, dealing with percentages, Z-scores, all of that. And last but not least, math exemplars of African descent. A lot of students don't even know that black people do math, right? Lisa Delpit authored a book called Multiplication is for White People, right? This is where the title was a quote though. It was a quote from a young brother in Louisiana, right? She's doing her observation of some students in Louisiana, and she's talking to this young brother, and he's like, yeah, we do addition and subtraction, right? But multiplication and division, that's harder. That's for white people, right? So that's a mentality, right? That's a mentality. And I believe that part of that mentality comes from them not knowing that black people do math, not knowing that black mathematicians exist. Black people, that have earned PhDs in mathematics have existed. Marjorie Lee Brown, Albert Cox, people like that, right? But not even just the people with mathematical degrees, right? But also people that practice mathematics. Like earlier I mentioned Du Bois. Du Bois is not known as a mathematician per se, but when you look at the books like The Philadelphia Negro, and you look at all the statistical analysis he was doing, he's doing high-level math, right? When you think about people like Adam Clayton Powell Jr., politician, from the 1950s, 1960s, right? He earned a math degree from Colgate University, right? You think about Sundiata Acoli. Sundiata Acoli was in the car with Assata Shakur and Zaid Malik Shakur back in 1973 when the New Jersey State Troopers attempted to assassinate the 3 of them, right? Zaid Malik Shakur was assassinated. Assata Shakur was shot, right? She survived, and she's in Cuba now, right? But he earned a math degree from Prairie View A&M University in Texas. His brother was a mathematician, right? Which kind of leads me to believe that, and when you look at like a lot of people through history that have these math backgrounds, like whether it's Sundiata Acoli or Amilcar Cabral from PAIGC, revolutionary in West Africa and Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde Islands, who was fighting, leading the people against the Portuguese who had colonized them, he was an agricultural engineer. He went to Portugal and studied agricultural engineering. So it just leads me to believe that the mathematical grounding that they had helped them to see that the solution to their problems was to be more revolutionary, right? Instead of trying to assimilate into the system, to stand up and try to push back and fight the system and create a better system that's more humane for everybody, right? So this is why I think having the exemplars is important. So black students won't just think multiplication is for white people, right? Now, some of the benefits, being a math jelly. A jelly is the Wolof term for griot. You're probably familiar with griot, but griot is a French term. So if we're talking about African people, we should use African language, right? So jelly, like being a math jelly, somebody that's like telling stories, like telling math stories, right? That, are, transmitted through generations, transmitted from, this generation to that generation, are telling the history of a community, right? But using math to do that, right? And one of the things I think that I wasn't very good at early in my career was making math more real and making connections to the students, and actually it having a storytelling aspect. Because the way I was taught math, it didn't really have, my teachers, most of them didn't really provide a storytelling aspect. The math was very dry. It was very uber objective. It's just X's and Y's, numbers, operational symbols. Memorize the procedures and get the right answer and go into the next problem. There's no story involved. There's no real concept being developed, right? Nowadays, when I teach math, I tell students this. I'm like, look, every math problem is a story, right? The original problem, that's the opening scene, right? Every step you progress through until you get to the answer, right? That's the finale. The answer is the finale. Well, actually, no. The answer is not the finale. You know why? Because if you're solving an equation, you need to go back and check your work and make sure that your answer is right. So when you check your work and you find, okay, the left side of the equation equals the right side, okay, cool, right? That's the finale, right? That's when you know everything is good, all right? But within the story, and as you progress through that story, everything should make sense from one step to the next. So I always tell students, like, if something doesn't make sense to you when you get to the second step or the third step, then that's when your hands should go up in the air. You got to get over your embarrassment. Don't worry about looking dumb to the rest of your peers or whatever. You got to ask that question. Where'd that 2 come from? Where'd the 3 go? There was a 4 in the previous step. Where'd it go? How'd that happen, right? These are the questions that you got to ask. So look at it like a story, right? Also, what this does is this whole system, it provides political education, similar to what the Black Panther Party was trying to do with the free breakfast program, right? Political education. If you're talking about people, like if you're talking about solving equations and we're talking about Malcolm X at the same time, now that's a way to provide political education, all right? And also I already mentioned historical awareness. So we're providing historical awareness at the same time. And also the enhanced conceptual understanding of math, right? When I was a student, I didn't have a good conceptual understanding of math. I was very good with procedural awareness, right? I looked at math like how I looked at video games. The video game, you learn the patterns, you try to beat the level to get to the next level. And ultimately, you beat enough levels, you win the game. You beat the game, right? With math, I did the same thing. I learned the patterns, I memorized the algorithms for long division, multiplication, solving multi-step equations. But if you ask me how does it work, I don't know. I couldn't tell you why it worked. So I'd be stuck when it comes time for the standardized test. That's going to test me on my conceptual knowledge and my conceptual awareness, right? Which we know the SAT does, which we know all the standardized tests do. They're testing really a conceptual knowledge, right? You might get 1 or 2 questions here and there where it's like straightforward and you're like surprised. Oh, wow, they gave me this. They just want me to solve for X. Okay, cool, right? But I didn't have a very good conceptual understanding. But when you're telling stories about, or connecting, the different math concepts of like solving radical equations, which I'm gonna talk about in a minute, to, the Black radical tradition or like political prisoners and things like that, something should really click, hopefully. Hopefully something clicks. And you're like, okay, yeah, because that's just like when this happens, or that's just like when that happens, okay. So you're starting to understand the concept of what's really happening within that algebra, within that geometry, within the arithmetic even, right? And also it gives a quantitative understanding of history, right? So this is beneficial on the other side too, because I always wonder about this. There are so many students that have no real concept of percentages or fractions, right? So they don't understand percentages and fractions. And they're in your math class and your science class, you know this, right? But they'll go to US history class, go to world history class, go to African American history class. And and they'll read a paragraph in the textbook that's talking about a percentage. 38% of people did this thing, whatever it is. They read the paragraph, they sound confident when they read it, but then as the history teacher, how do you know that they understand it? If you don't understand a percentage, how can you understand the information that you just read? You can't, because the math teacher knows, the chemistry teacher knows, like, okay, well, they don't understand what a percentage is. They don't understand what a percentage means, right? So if they don't understand what a percentage means in a math class, or in a STEM space, technically a STEM space, then how can they understand what a percentage means in a history space, right? If they don't understand what a fraction is, or how to add fractions, or they think that, 3/4 plus 2/3 is 5/7, and they're adding denominators. If they're adding denominators in a math class, or in a math space, or in an algebra class, right, when they're trying to solve an equation, but they need to add fractions and they're adding denominators, then when they're in the history class, when the word fraction is used, or this fraction of the population is doing this, or this fraction of the population is doing that, how can they actually understand that information, right? So that's foundational. So I think they need to have that mathematical foundation in order to even understand the history that's being taught. All right, so let's talk about some examples. So this is where the rubber meets the road, I guess you would say, right? I actually use this. So I was teaching, we're doing some work in a geometry class, an online geometry class that I teach, earlier this week, actually. So this was very serendipitous that, because I know I had to do this presentation. So I just said, well, let me use this, right? So the students are, they're trying to find an area of a circle, right? Pi r squared, we replace pi with 3.14. We're not answering it in terms of pi, we're using 3.14, right? So we're doing that, and I'm reminding the students, I said, look, make sure you follow order of operations, all right? If the radius is 3, I don't want to see none of y'all doing 3.14 times 3 and then squaring that. Don't do that. Don't violate the order of operations. Respect the order of operations, right? But then I pivoted, and I said, look, I want you to also think about that. I said, look, have any of y'all read The Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? He wrote in 1963. I think he wrote it in 63, around that time, right? They said no. I said, okay, I highly recommend it to y'all. Because in that letter, what he's doing is responding to clergymen and other people that were critical of him for being a rabble-rouser, for being a troublemaker. And the critique of actually the white moderates in the community was that they privileged the maintenance of law and order over justice, right? So when you think about order of operations, there should be an order in society, right? Because without order, you just have chaos, right? But the order in place should be consistent with justice. And this is one of the things that Dr. King was talking about. This is what he talked about throughout, his whole career as an activist and as a preacher, right? And it also ties to, ancient African tradition, which is also African-American history, because African-American history doesn't start at 1619. You go back to the continent. We go way back, right? So ancient Kemet, Mayat, right? The 7, principles of Mayat, one of them is order, right? But order in Mayat is connected to justice, right? So again, this is like an example of, how we can take a math concept, order of operations, right? Something that seems like, it's just numbers, knowing where the parentheses goes, following the order, making sure you multiply or divide, right? Because sometimes you divide before you multiply, because you don't want to be one of these arguments on Facebook, these, order of operations questions, right? But it's deeper than that. Because this is one of these, what I call conceptual double entendres, right? Because we're talking about order of operations, but it also can be applied to social relationships, right? And this is, Dr. King laid it out in Letter from a Birmingham Jail, right? Which I recommend to everybody. Anybody that hasn't read it, or even if you have read it, go read it again, right? It's a great critique. It's almost like a good rap battle. It's like a response. It's like a response track almost, like when you read it. And the fact that he was incarcerated and he actually wrote it in the margins of newspapers because they wouldn't give him paper. They wouldn't give him paper. So he wrote it over a course of days in the margins of newspapers that he had, right? Which is just amazing to me, right? So again, ML connecting Martin Luther King Jr. to the order of operations, right? This is an example of Histematics, all right? Radical equations in the Black radical tradition. So I have a picture of Assata Shakur and also her autobiography, Assata, right? Book which changed my life. My daughter's named after Assata, named Assata because of that book. You know, also my daughter Asada, if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see some of my videos feature her. Well, really, I should say they feature me. Really, her videos, the videos feature me, actually. She's the star. But, because some things, you know, things that, you know, I want to teach her anyway, I just say, well, you know, let's teach the world. You know, anybody watches this, you know, well, you're learning this, other people can learn it too. But anyway, like, and again, what I'm also doing with this, with Histematics, I'm like kind of inviting people into my mind, the way my brain works. When I'm solving radical equations, the way I think about it is that it's two main steps. You got to isolate the radical and eliminate the radical. Isolate the radical and eliminate the radical. This sounds like COINTELPRO. It's the same exact process. Identify the radicals in the community that are going to, you know, get the people all riled up and get the people to stand up and go against oppression and, you know, organize and whatnot. You got to isolate those people. Do your best to isolate them, right? Create negative propaganda around them. You create stories about them. You know, do whatever you got to do. Isolate them. You know, maybe, and then eliminate them. How are you going to eliminate them? Maybe you kill them, right? Or maybe put them in jail for 40 years, 50 years.
Give them a corporate job.
Isolate, eliminate, right? But it's the same thing. It's the same thing we're doing in the math class. It's right here. We all know this. We teach this stuff, right? Isolate the radical, eliminate the radical. So it's like a lot of students will forget the process because they'll forget the concept. But imagine, like, you know, so when they're sitting in class trying to take that test and they're like, wait, how do you do this again? Oh, yeah, Asada Shakur, remember the story? Yeah, talking about, yeah, right. You know, Black Panther Party and, you know, different people like that, different, you know, right. Isolate and eliminate, right? So it's conceptual. There's a storytelling aspect to the math now, right? Solving equations using principles of Maya. I kind of touched on this earlier. With this, I always think about, well, many of the principles are applied in solving an equation, but I was thinking specifically about balance, right? Because you got to maintain balance, right? How many of your students want to, like, subtract 2 on the left side and then don't subtract 2 on the right side? So they get it wrong. It's like, bro, sis, you got to be balanced. This is about balance in this class. When we're doing algebra, we got to be balanced, right? Doing whatever you do on the left side, you're going to do it on the right side, right? And again, this connects us to the principles of Maya, right? Balance. I mean, we get into the other principles too, the truth, right? The last step in the problem, go back and check your work. I always tell students, like, math is about finding the truth, right? Because if I say x, if I say x equals 2, I'm telling you something. How do you know if I'm lying or not? How do you know if that person is lying? You know they're telling the truth because you should be able to go back and replace x with a 2 everywhere, and the left side should be with the right side. And so a lot of people that think that we all encounter, they probably think they're bad at math. They don't recognize that they're using math all the time. Every time you say something like, well, something ain't adding up, because you know somebody lying to you. You're using algebra. That's an algebraic concept. Something ain't adding up, right? Just like if somebody said, if a student wrote x equals 3, and then you plug that 3 in there, and you're like, okay, I got 24 on the left side, and then I got 19 on the right side, something ain't adding up. You can't tell me 24 is the same thing as 19. But again, this is also why I call my classes scam avoidance. This is how you avoid scams. Learning math, this is how you avoid scams, because somebody that's trying to scam you will try to tell you that 24 is the same thing as 19. They will. Because they'll owe you $24 and say, well, look, I'm going to give you 19. It's the same thing. It's all good. That's what they'll try to do. They'll try to play with you, right? So again, balance and, different principles of Maya can be applied here. Chairman Fred Hampton and checking solutions, right? This ties into what we just talked about. So this is one of the quotes from the late Chairman Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party from Illinois. You can jail the revolutionary, but you can't jail revolution. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you'll have answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain, and conclusions that don't conclude. Chairman Fred Hampton. So this to me makes me think of, if x plus 12 equals 5, does x equal 14? This is a solution that doesn't solve. It's an explanation that doesn't explain, right? It's like a extraneous solution. We have extraneous solutions in equations, right? And that's a little different because you might, you do the math correctly, right? But it's, there's certain equations where that solution still is not valid, right? So that's where you got to check your work. right? You always got to go back and check your work, right? So to connect in this could be connected as well. Let me see, I think I got like one more example. I love this one, since Malcolm X is one of my intellectual heroes. The Malcolm X method for proportional equations. Every time I do something in a math problem and I'm doing operations using a cross product property or I'm going diagonal, I'm thinking of Malcolm X. I'm thinking of Malcolm X, right? And I think we should do that. I think we can do that to evoke the ancestors. You know, we can invoke whoever we want to, really, right? So when you get here, you got this proportion, 11 over 5 equals x minus 4 over d. We're going this way, 11 times d, and 5 times x minus 4. You get that? That's Malcolm X. That's what I'm always thinking of, right? So there's so many different ways, and like, so I have a whole other presentation just on like Malcolm X methods of mathematics, right? Calculus, taking the product rule, quotient rule, right? You got F and then F prime. You got G and then G prime. What you do with the product rule, right? You put the F prime with the G, and you put the G prime with the F, right? In the numerator, well, not in the numerator. That's the quotient rule. But you're going in diagonals. So what I'm saying is, like, throughout my career, what I've started to look for is like different opportunities. Like, cause like I said, I would be in class and we're in geometry, but I want to talk about this, right? I want to talk about this history. So I'm always looking for opportunities. Like, how can I do it in a way that's seamless, in a way that's organic, and in a way that makes sense, right? And I'm also trying to, like, you know, kind of, you know, deconstruct like those boundary lines. Because there's so many boundary lines, like in education, which I think causes a lot of confusion, right? Come to school, first period, you're in this class, 60 minutes, 45 minutes, a bell rings, boom, get up, go to another room. And I think we're programmed this way. Like, that's how I was programmed from my own school experience. You know, so I think it's a subtle programming that this subject don't got nothing to do with that subject. Because I got up and I physically moved. I'm in a different notebook, a different section of my notebook. Listening to a different person now, might be in a different part of the building, right? And a lot of times we talk about interdisciplinary learning and cross-curricular, you know, teaching. We talk about it. And I remember having all those, you know, PDs in August every year. But we would talk about it, talk real big about it, bring in a consultant, pay them 10 grand or whatever to come tell us how to do it. And then by the time it's like the middle of September, we might have had one meeting. And then in October, we didn't forgot about it. And it never really happened. At least that was in the schools that I worked at, you know? So this is like a way like to really actually do it, you know? Questions, well, before I get to the questions, since we're also talking about the STEM pipeline, right? And I mentioned the book, you know, Multiplication is for White People by Lisa Delpit earlier. So I wrote a book in June called How to Use All This Math, Volume 1. And this is the first in the series. So what I'm doing is, you know, because we always say, like, you know, if parents would be able to do this and parents would be able to do that, right? I think parents should do more, right, in terms of preparing their children for math class. But as opposed to it just being rhetoric, I created a resource, right? In addition to the YouTube channel, right? So what this book does is I take everyday activities, going to the store, running errands, riding around in the car, going to the kitchen to get a snack. And I show the parents, like, look, you can leverage this to develop skills in algebra, arithmetic, geometry, right? And then not only that, they can practice those things on a daily basis. So that way, by the time they go into the math class, right, 6th grade, 5th grade, or whatever, and the curriculum starts talking about ratios, proportions, percentages, they're not like, the math anxiety doesn't kick in because they've already been doing that in the household anyway, in a safe and comfortable space. Right? So that's what How to Use All This Math Volume 1 is about. And that, I believe, is how we get more black children to go into STEM fields. Because a lot of people go into STEM fields because they were already good at math anyway. So it's like, because, you know, I think about the people that either I went to college with or that I've taught that would be great engineers. They'd be great scientists. But then once you tell them, well, you know, if you want to be an engineer, well, you know, what I got to do to be an engineer? I kind of like this work. I like, you know, robotics. I like doing this type of stuff. Well, you got to go up to Calc 3 and then, whoa. Stop right there. I'm good. I'm cool. And then they end up doing something else. And that's not to say that everybody has to go into STEM, But I think people should not go into STEM, not because they don't qualify for it, but because they don't want to. And a lot of people don't go into STEM because they don't qualify for it. So it's not even an option. At least in their mind, it's not an option. And I think the way to remedy that is to have more children become much stronger at math early and often, right? And we don't even have to follow the guidelines set forth by, the public school system, charter school system, private school system, because what is eighth grade math? What does that mean, right? Why do we have to wait until, I'm a math teacher, so my son was 6 years old and we were doing simple equations. And I'm sure a lot of you, if you have children, you did the same thing. You didn't wait for the school system. You didn't follow their curriculum. You said, you know what, he can handle this, or she can handle this. So we're gonna do it, right? But in his class, he was in first grade. His class wasn't solving simple equations, but he could handle it. And it's not that my son was a genius. He wasn't smarter than any of his classmates. That just wasn't the curriculum, right? So what I say is if we're serious about getting more black children into STEM, then we gotta, develop those math skills early on. And we also have to address some of this cultural propaganda where we are taught to believe that math isn't for us, right? So that's really those are some of the things that Histematics is meant to remedy and meant to address. This is my contact info, my email address, the company website, all this math. I will have merch in the future. I need to get on that. The YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel has over 600 videos. The topics range from arithmetic up to calculus. And in the beginning of most of the videos, you get a small history lesson. I'm also a major proponent of HBCUs, all of them, even though I know some of us like to have friendly beef between HBCUs, but it's all love though, right? But I promote all the HBCUs, right? Especially I like to promote the more obscure HBCUs, like the ones that people might have never heard of, like, Fort Valley State, like in Georgia, places like that, So you'll see that in the video. And also students get to see a black man doing math. Like I said, with a lot of the propaganda that's out there, we don't all rap and and sing and dance and play sports. Yeah, we don't all do that. So we gotta show more. We gotta compete with that. And that's something I had to learn too, because when I was growing up, my dad was a teacher also, still teaching to this day, 40 years, right? He was always very critical of the rap music that I would listen to, right? But what I learned from his example is that you can't just sit back and critique it. You got to compete with it. You got to get out there. You got to get out there and go to war, right? So if our children are being given all these images that I think are negative, 5 minutes, okay, that I think are negative, I can't just say they're negative, right? I got to provide an alternative, right? It's almost like when people make critiques of drug dealing, right? And I don't think people should sell drugs, but it's not enough just to tell somebody to stop selling drugs. You got to give them an alternative economic opportunity, right? And then if they want to continue selling drugs, then we can have a different conversation, right? So it's like the same thing. So that's really one of the main purposes of the YouTube channel, just to create propaganda, positive propaganda, right? And show that math is not that hard, show that math can be cool, right? That's what I'm trying to do. And also the social media handles are all this math. Everything is at all this math. All right. Questions? You have a question?
The email, is that on purpose with one L or two L's?
Oh, that's an error. Thank you. There should be 2 L's. It should be all this math.
He's spelling lawyer.
Yeah.
So quick tip for.
Let me go. Then you're next.
Quick tip for a social study teacher that wants to teach math, in the classroom, just reverse engineer what you're doing.
Yeah. So anytime you deal with any percentages, so I have this initiative that we're going to do, do all this math, is pinpointing certain books that I believe everybody, all black students should read, something like on the miseducation of the Negro, right? Go through that book. Treat that book like a math textbook. We would never think of that as a math textbook, but it is a math textbook in the sense that, Woodson is talking about, he's quantifying history. He's quantifying our experience. You can go through we can do this with any book. You go through a book and there's numerical information in it. There's quantitative data in any book. And then you can create math word problems based on that, right? a couple of years back, I was kind of like experimenting with this. I did, I don't know if I created like maybe 20 questions. Like I never read The Bluest Eye when I was younger, right? So I kind of felt some type of way, 'cause I know a lot of people that had read it, so I felt like left out of a lot of conversations. So I read The Bluest Eye, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna make math problems based on the content of The Bluest Eye. Then I realized it kind of showed me that like we could do this with any text, right? So for the social studies teacher, I would say like any book that you're covering, any information, just create some math problems. And they don't even have to be, like a lot of times when we think of math, we think of like Calc 3, right? Math is, very diverse, right? It could be arithmetic. And a lot of the math deficiencies that a lot of people in society have are not Calculus 3 deficiencies. They are arithmetic deficiencies. They are fractional deficiencies, knowing how to multiply fractions, knowing the concept of, adding decimals, and knowing why, okay, well, why do the decimal points have to be lined up? Just knowing those types of things, right? Understanding proportional relationships, understanding fractional relationships. Students hate fractions, and I think that's by design, because if you don't understand fractions, you can't understand ratios. If you don't understand ratios, you can't understand proportions. If you don't understand proportions, you can't understand disproportional relationships. And if you don't understand disproportional relationships, you can be very easily taken advantage of. Because somebody can try to make you think that these two things are equal, but they're not. But if you don't understand disproportional relationships, you'll think it's sweet. You'll think it's all good, right? But you see how the chain of events, what leads up to that? So how many of you have had students that say, I hate fractions, right? So many, right? I believe this is by design. It's fractions as a concept, and not even just, like there's students also that understand how to add them, how to find the LCD, how to do all that, but they don't really understand the concept of what a fraction actually is, or what fractions actually are, right? So then that's an issue as well. So these are things I want us to think about. But again, with the conceptual, right, when you're given, history and whatnot, combining it with the math, then, because we can have that conversation, because in this community doesn't get as many resources as that community, but they're trying to tell you that y'all are, but y'all really not, right? So this is why you got to understand proportions, but you got to understand ratios first. And in order to understand ratios, you got to understand fractions. So you got to understand all of that. And you also got to understand how the equivalencies between fractions, decimals, and percentages. You got to understand all of that. Because math is a language. We're just a language with a whole bunch of rules, right? You had a question?
I wanted to say that I just want to know why people are so afraid of math. People are really afraid of math, and I'm like, where do you think that comes from? Because to me, I'm a person I think logically anyway, so it makes sense to me because I'm like, it's orderly. Like you can't understand order, and it's like you separate people. Sometimes it's like the creatives. They don't understand the orderly part of it. We tend to separate people like, you're logical and you like math, and then you're creative and you like everything else. So it's like, how can you just dissolve that fear that people have of math in the first place that stops them from even trying to look at it? They just check out when you just say math.
So I think that's a program. There's a serious programming that takes place in classrooms, and I think it's also the way math is taught. I think it's like this idea that, because again, I'm putting myself out here. Early in my career, I didn't embrace mistakes. Like I would be like, kind of not angry, but like I didn't show students the value in making mistakes and how the mistakes they can learn from them, right? So a lot of students might sit in math classrooms afraid to make mistakes. So if you're afraid to make mistakes, you won't take the risk. And if you won't take the risk, then you won't make the mistake, so you can't learn from it, right? Like I was telling my sister this one day, like my nephew, Maceo, right? Shout out to Maceo. He's like 7 years old, but he's real like adventurous. I come and go visit my mom. He's at the house and, he's climbing up the banister and everything. And he has no fear. Like he doesn't care if he might fall down and break his leg or something. He don't care. And I was telling myself, like, look, he can leverage that to be a great math student, because a part I think of being good at math is being willing to take risks and not being scared to be wrong. Because if you're scared to be wrong, then you won't try, right? Because it's like, people try to sometimes keep a perfect record. Well, if I keep a perfect, like a boxer, like, I'm 1-0, right? But if I don't fight nobody else, I maintain my perfect record, right? So I think some students do that in math class, right? It's like, well, I'm not even going to try, because I don't want to get it wrong, But I definitely think it's programming to keep people scared of math. I've experienced that. Like I have my moments, right? Because from K through 12, I was pretty strong at math, but I had some rough patches, where I was sitting in class like, what the, and I was intimidated to raise my hand and ask because I really felt like I didn't understand my misunderstanding enough to even ask a valid question. I didn't know what the valid question would be, right? So I know what that feels like, which fuels me in my tutoring, right? Because sometimes I get triggered. Like I might have a student that sends over some work before a tutoring session. And I'm like, oh, I remember this, right? I remember this. But the difference is because I've had so many wins and I've got so many math problems right, that I'm able to persevere and fight through it instead of just folding, So I know, and I think, so I experienced that too. Like getting those wrong answers in class, being embarrassed in class. I think all of that, takes a toll. And people really do have a type of trauma, a math trauma. People need to we need to figure out ways to heal from our math trauma because it really holds us back in life because math, I see it also as synonymous with problem solving. And math is problem solving. But I think a lot of times in the classroom, we get so caught up in the X's and the Y's and we don't look at the deeper meaning. And I don't expect children to be able to see that, but I think it's the teachers and the adults that have to see that and explicitly say that, right? Because no, you won't be in a grocery store and have to use Pythagorean theorem. You won't. It's not going to happen. But the same type of thinking thought process that goes into a word problem dealing with the ladder, leaning up against the side of the house and figuring out how long the ladder is, if it's this far away from the house, right? Is the same thought process that you have to think about where it's like, look, okay, I got $150 in food stamps, got $200 in my checking account, and I got to feed this many people. Or Thanksgiving is coming up, we got to get all the food. I know I'm going to get some money from him over here tomorrow. So, okay, so how much can I get right now? Right? That's a thought process. That's a serious thought process. That's a mathematical thought process, right? Very similar to the same one you'd have to use with the Pythagorean theorem problem, with the ladder leaning up against the side of the house. The same exact one. So I think, but a lot of times students can't see that connection. They just be like, man, I ain't never going to use the Pythagorean theorem in real life. Well, but the skills that you need for the Pythagorean theorem problem, you will apply in other situations. And before, I know my time is up, but
I know, coming up here.
real quick, just like with athletes, think of all the exercises and strength conditioning that athletes do. They don't do most of those things on the field or on the court, but it helps them in the game, regardless.
Yeah.
So, thank you for your time. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Tell all your students about it. Yeah, I'll be around all day. Anybody wants to talk? I do. I love doing that. I do.
Now, that court. And it shows from different cameras. I'll be back to circle back
Love the energy.
Thank you.
When you talk about learning from mistakes,
Right.
very end. So we're building an app like Kahoot, but the best wrong answers.
Okay.
So we're trying to shift the focus on just getting the right answer and picking it. We actually talking about, thinking about, and learning from mistakes in this sentence.
That's a good thing. I wish I had done that more when I was younger. Because when I was young, I was just focused on just the right answer, But yeah.
So I'm going to definitely check out your YouTube channel.
Please do.
We're also doing a live stream version of our app.
Okay.
And we'd love to talk about doing something.
Yeah.
Are you working with some schools already? Or?
I'm in the process of creating relationships with schools, but that's definitely one of the things I want to do more of. Definitely want to do more of that.
What's the best way to connect with you?
The email or
On LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. I think it's under my name, just Akil Parker.
Okay.
Akil Parker. Well, you can email me. It's supposed to be 2 L's.
Okay, all this math with 2 L's. I got
Yeah,
it.
it's
Cool.
supposed to be 2 L's.